Hello crafty friends, it's Jess from jesscrafts.com, and today I'm here with another one sheet wonder. So like all my one sheet wonders, the template that tells you exactly how to cut your 6x6 paper and the suggested sketch, the PDF is over on my blog so that you can get all the measurements and you don't have to worry about what I'm cutting as I'm doing it in the video, but this is just to provide you some inspiration. Now, with this particular one sheet wonder, my plan was to use a triangle, which is a little tricky in some ways because of the matting, but we'll talk a little bit about that. And it did make some of the other measurements a little bit trickier, but they're listed, and it's basically going to involve measuring in an eighth instead of a quarter. I'm going to, with my rectangle, I'll cut it first as a square and then just cut it on the diagonal. So I'm only going to give you the measurements of the square. Now, I'm using some Lawn Fawn products. I'm using a much older Lawn Fawn paper pad and from their new release stamp set, a little mini stamp set that has an axolotl in it, which is a water amphibian. So I decided to first start with some blue paper because I thought that made sense for an underwater creature, but then I just felt like with this particular one sheet wonder, using all of the same pattern just wasn't working for me. I felt like I really needed to mix up the patterns. So this is one-sided paper, which is not necessarily my preference, but I do like the simplicity of the Lawn Fawn paper pads, and this is one I've had for a long time. With that in mind, I just took another sheet, and that way I could mix the patterns. So I'm going to create 4 cards in all because each sheet creates 2 cards. So if you want to mix up your patterns and it's single sided, you absolutely can do that. You're just going to create more cards. I can understand that maybe you don't necessarily need all of those cards at one time, but I do encourage you to consider donating your cards if you are finding that you're making more than you need. You can, make one for that special person that you had in mind as you started the design, and then take the other 2 or 1 to 3 or however many you create and find an organization to donate them to by going over to my blog where I have a card drive resources page. Now, this time, because of the way the triangle works, I am going to make everything an 1/8 of an inch matte instead of a 1/4 of an inch matte. That's sort of what I traditionally do. I've done this before because of the way the design worked out. So yes, 1/4 inch is my preference just because I like a nice strong border. However, the 1/8 of an inch, sometimes just the math works out better on that. And I picked my second sheet of paper here once I realized that I felt like it was too busy. And I just kind of used the idea of thinking about the color wheel. If I already had blue and green, what might be another color that complements? And yellow works well because all 3 of them would be next to each other on the color wheel. But you could also go with something that's sort of opposing, like a red-orange in this case. However, this paper pad has a lot of yellow in it, which makes sense because those 3 colors coordinate well together. There's a little bit of pink too, and that's just more of a general spring color palette, which is actually going to work out because the axolotl, the pictures that I was looking up, coloring it yellow makes sense, which is perfect. And that was kind of the reason that I started with the blue-green inspiration, because I knew that I could color the axolotl yellow. But I'm going to incorporate it with the second piece of paper, the yellow, and the little bit of pink is going to work well because, again, it's part of the collection. If you're ever not sure like what's a good, color paper match or something like that, the designers who design pattern paper have, they have the experience with that. So kind of trust their gut and use that to maybe guide the colors that you pick for your coloring or the things that you add to it. Like if you're like, what might be a good colored matte for this pattern paper collection? Well, look at some of the other papers in the collection and maybe you can find a new color. Now, as I go to adhere all of this, because it has a layer of cardstock behind it, and there's so many layers that are on top of each other, but they're not completely flush. Like here, the top of this rectangular piece will be on the card base, but also on top of this smaller rectangle that's several layers up. And so I want to build up some of the layers behind my focal point rectangle so that everything is sitting kind of flush and smooth rather than letting some of it try to adhere all the way back to the card base, and that'll create kind of like a bump and things might not stick as well. So here what I'm doing is I'm just taking scraps of cardstock and I'm layering them up behind. And this is a great way if you wind up with a bunch of scraps from creating your mats. This is one thing that you can do with them that will actually overall make your card look just a little bit more put together. So going back to what I did with the cutting here, I was able to cut a rectangle that was a 1/4 inch bigger than the rectangle that I cut my triangle from. And that only created a very small border. It didn't create the traditional 1/4 inch border. Usually if you cut a rectangle and then you cut a rectangle that's a 1/4 inch bigger on each side, you're going to get a bigger border. But that doesn't work as well with the triangles. So that's just something to keep in mind. They can be a little bit trickier. In this case, it seemed to work out. I will admit that even people have tried to leave me some comments with some suggestions, but I've still had some mixed results. So it's definitely something I'm working on as I incorporate triangles into my one sheet wonders. But this particular one did seem to work out quite well, and that's why I wanted to share it with you if you wanted to mix it up and have a different shape besides rectangles in the design. So for coloring the axolotl, like I said, I wanted to incorporate yellow, and I looked up pictures. They can be a translucent yellow with these pink frills coming off of their heads. So I picked the Y1 family as a lighter yellow. It can get quite bright towards the Y18, but I did limit myself to the Y15. The first one was a little bit brighter than I intended, so I toned it down, and I went all the way down to a Y00. So it was Y15, 13, 11, and then the 00. And I tried to keep most of it the lightest color. And then I added a little bit of pink, but I used the R's and went for sort of corally pink. Here, I'm going to stamp my sentiment. I have this banner die from Whimsy Stamps, and I have a couple of banner dies that are kind of go-tos for me, some from Whimsy, some from Cat Scrappiness. And I have taken a piece of cardstock and cut all the banners that I like out of it, or a lot of the banners that I like out of it, and added the tape behind it. And I keep this off in a drawer so that when I want to stamp on one of these banners, I can use my MISTI to line things up perfectly and stamp a bunch of them without having to create a negative die cut each time. I also often will keep one inside the bag that my die is in. And I do like to keep my favorite banner dies on a magnetic holder from Twiddler's Nook on my desk so that they're in easy reach and I don't have to go to my die storage to get them. I am going to finish off the card by adding the axolotl, which I cut out with my ScanNCut, and the banner sentiment. I wasn't sure quite where I wanted to place it. Sort of in the center is a very traditional placement, but I thought it might be fun if it's just a little bit off to the side. I know these cards can be super simple, but I like how the characters still add a lot of personality to them, and things like colored ink for your sentiment or colored cardstock for your mats can just add a little bit of extra interest to them. So that is it for my cards today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you're interested in more crafting tutorials, specifically one sheet wonder tutorials or ways to use 6x6 paper pads, please subscribe to my channel. I will leave you links in the video description to the products that I used today, as well as to the free templates that you can pick up over on my blog. Thanks so much for watching. Have an awesome day. Bye.